New York City, August 1977. Dietrich looks down at the body, lying in a ratty, torn sleeping bag next to rubble in the vacant lot between two buildings. It looks more like a Halloween prop, a bunch of fake bones in a loose sack left outside to scare kids. Except the head, or what's left of it. That's all too real. It's crushed, bashed in. The ME is on his way to the vacant lot, but Dietrich doesn't need a medical examiner to know that the victim was beaten to death. With an axe handle, a ball bat, a tire iron, the ME will probably be able to tell him. The ME will also try to determine which blows were struck in what order, but Dietrich already has a good idea that the blows to the head came last. Otherwise, what was the point of breaking every bone in his body? The point was to inflict maximum pain and to teach a lesson. Al Ritchie, Dietrich's partner, walks over from talking to the uniform who took the call. "You know who this is, right?" Dietrich says, "It's Batshit Bobby." Dietrich hadn't recognized him from the face, which was pretty much gone, but from the flowered shirt and the long, straggly red hair hanging from what was left of the back of his head. Bobby Mullen was well known in the neighborhood. The kid was batshit crazy. Would walk around singing his lunatic songs, doing goofy dances, saying crazy shit. Bobby has been in the precinct house, 100 times, Dietrich wonders? Public drunkenness, creating a nuisance, panhandling, shoplifting. The fucking mook stole ho-hos, for Christ's sake. Harassing civilians, basically just being batshit Bobby. He was a regular inhabitant of the mentally ill revolving door, in and out of jail, in and out of hospitals, always spun out back on the street. Most of the locals tolerated him. At least one of them didn't, Dietrich thinks. "Anyone seen Lewis around?" he asks. "I haven't," Ritchie says. Lewis, Dietrich flips through mental file cards for his last name, is Bobby's running buddy. An older black wino who usually sleeps in this lot too. Dietrich doesn't see his shopping cart, doesn't see his stuff. "You think he saw it?" Ritchie asks. "Maybe," Dietrich says. "If he did, he's probably scared shitless and is hiding somewhere." "Who's the lead?" Ritchie asks. "You or me?" "I'll take it. Selfish prick." Dietrich knows what he means. A homeless whack job in a vacant lot on the Upper West Side. No one is going to put a lot of heat on getting it cleared. Not with all the heat and light on the so-called Son of Sam killings. That's what the whole city, the media, the department is focused on. It's August in New York, 102 with 1,000% humidity. No one is going to bust balls over batshit Bobby. Go through the motions, shrug, and put it on the shelf. And there's more to Ritchie's question than who gets to slide on a homicide. Dietrich knows what his partner is really asking, and he's too hungover to play games. Dietrich says, "We both know who did this. Who ordered it, anyway." Dietrich repairs to Drury's, where they know enough not to see the badge, but to give the blue discount anyway. Basically, a cop leaves a decent tip, and that's it. Drury's is dark and cool like a bar should be. A serious drinker's bar. Which is good because Dietrich is a serious drinker. An alcoholic. He knows it. Ritchie knows it. His lieutenant knows it. His captain knows it. Shit, the chief of D's probably knows it. And Dietrich would be on the bow and arrow squad or off the job altogether, except that he cleared some big cases back in the day. A rock star murder cop. The nun that was raped and strangled, the young Dietrich cleared that. The patrolman who was shot to death by a dope dealer, Dietrich found him. Then there were the child murders. Dietrich was something back in the day. So now the upper brass is pretty much in tacit agreement that they'll let Dietrich hang in for the next 18 months or so until he can get his 20, pull the pin, and collect his pension. In the meantime, he gets the garbage cases, which is fine with him. Batshit Bobby is garbage. Without needing to be asked, Drury sets a shot glass of vodka on the bar. Dietrich does Jameson's at night, vodka when he's on the job. Whatever the house vodka is, you don't want to wear out your welcome ordering expensive booze. "Is it true what I heard about batshit Bobby?" Drury asks. "Depends on what you heard," Dietrich says. He downs one shot and then a second. Bam, bam, he thinks. Double tap. 2 in the head. "I heard he got murdered," Drury says. "That's true. Beat to death, huh?" So it's out already, Dietrich thinks, which was pretty much the idea. He shrugs, downs the third shot, and feels a little better. He used to feel good getting drunk. Now he drinks just to get back to merely shitty and keep his hands from shaking. "Beat to death?" Drury asks again. Dietrich taps his index finger on the bar. Another. He's half in the bag when he comes out into the sweltering afternoon. You look at Dick Dietrich, you don't think he's anything special. 5'10", on the thinner side, black hair cut short, high, sharp cheekbones, and a narrow nose. "Needle-nosed Dick," Ricci called him once. "Better than that banana you got on your face," Dietrich said. "You want to see my banana?" Ricci asks. "Figures." Ricci is tall and thin, a skinny guinea, as he calls himself. He dresses sharp, holds himself well, is always busting Dietrich's balls about his wardrobe. "I should take you to Barney's," Ricci says sometimes. "Make you spend some money, you cheap bastard." "Who am I supposed to look good for?" Dietrich asks. "The victims? I don't think they care." Now Dietrich pops a stick of gum in his mouth. Yeah, that'll disguise it, he thinks, and goes to meet Ricci at the morgue. Schoenberg has Bobby on the table. "What do we got?" Dietrich asks. "Cause of death?" Schoenberg asks. "I'm calling it head trauma, but he might have died of internal bleeding first. The spleen is ruptured, 1 kidney. Compound fractures of the left and right radii are probably defensive wounds. Left humor is fractured. 4 broken ribs on the right side. Both patellas shattered. Green stick fracture of right femur. Both tibias fractured." "Weapon?" Dietrich asks. "Metal," Schoenberg says. "With some sharp edges and blunt surfaces. If I had to speculate, I'd say a tire iron." "Time of death?" "Sometime between 3 and 4 this morning," Schoenberg says. "Can you tell me which wounds happened first?" asks Dietrich. "No," Schoenberg says. "They came too close together. Does it matter?" "Sort of," Dietrich says. "One thing if you kill a guy with a blow to the head and then go berserk on his body. Another if you torture him, breaking his bones and finally giving him a coup de grace." Schoenberg says, "You can make a good supposition that the victim was asleep in his bag. The assailant stood over him and brought the weapon down with tremendous force. The most likely scenario in that case, Dietrich, is that he started with the legs and worked his way up to the head. Case of rage, I'd say." Dietrich and Ricci exchange a glance. They already knew it was a case of rage, and they were pretty sure whose rage it was. Back at the house, they come up with Lewis's last name, Chambers, and run it through the system. A big guy. His earlier mugshots show a heavily muscled man with a sad face and tired eyes. "He did 18 at Greenhaven on a 120, Ricci says. Aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. In this case, a gun, Dietrich reads in the file. Lucky for Chambers, the victim didn't die. 52 years old now, Lewis has spent most of the past 10 years on the street. Dietrich's seen him out there almost every day, every once in a while slipping him a buck or two. There but for the grace of God, Dietrich thinks. Dietrich goes home. A 1-bedroom, 2nd-floor walk-up in an old brownstone on 87th Street east of Amsterdam. He's been in the apartment for 17 years. It's rent-controlled, and the landlady who lives on the ground floor likes having a cop in the building and doesn't say anything about the trash bags full of empty bottles that he leaves in the garbage cans. The place is small, but he likes it that way. Easier to take care of, at least in the days he bothered to take care of it. He used to be meticulous. Now the bed goes unmade and there are dirty dishes in the sink. The front room is a combination sitting room, kitchen, and dining area. Dietrich has a sofa, an easy chair, and a small dining table. Bookcases line the walls because he used to read a lot. On the lower level are cases that hold his albums. Beethoven, Mozart, Chopin, Mahler, operas by Puccini and Verdi. A side table next to the easy chair holds an expensive Marantz turntable with an equally expensive Grade O needle cartridge. His records and his sound system are the only things he still manages to keep clean, and they're immaculate. A window next to the chair looks out onto 87th Street, and a slider near the kitchen area opens to a balcony big enough for one person, if that person isn't too big. It's too hot to sit out there now. Dietrich goes into the kitchen and pours 2 fingers of Jameson's into a squat glass greasy with fingerprints. He doesn't bother with ice, takes his drink, looks over the record jackets, picks Rubinstein doing Chopin's Nocturnes, and puts it on the turntable. The album, a set of 4 records, was a Christmas gift from Patricia. Long gone, like the other girlfriends. There was Patricia, Maureen, Gloria, Kelsey, Dawn, others. Dietrich loved each of them in his own insufficient way. They loved him back, but eventually he just wore them out. They knew they couldn't compete with the booze and the depression. Some of them fought longer than others. During his terminal argument with Patricia, he asked drunkenly, "Do you know what I do all day? Do you know what I see?" "No, because you never talk about it." "Believe me, you don't want to hear about the things I see," Dietrich said. "I wish I didn't see the things I see." "Then leave the job," Patricia said. "I don't know how to do anything else." Yeah, it was that, but it was more than that. Dietrich always felt this responsibility toward the murdered, that he was their representative, their only voice, and he owed their families something, too. He saw their pain, and there was nothing he could do to bring their loved ones back. At least he could get them some justice. So he didn't leave. "It's not a job to you," Patricia said. "It's a religion." So she left. Now he takes off his jacket and lays it over the arm of the sofa, loosens his tie, and unbuttons the top button of his sweat-soaked shirt. One drink, he thinks, and then he'll get out of his stale clothes, take a shower, and make something for dinner. Now he sits, drinks, listens to the Chopin. Nocturne number 6 in G minor. The needle bumping against the center of the album wakes Dietrich up in his chair. He's fuzzy, disoriented. How long have I been here? Looking at his watch, he's surprised to see that it's 7 in the morning. Christ, he thinks, you fell asleep right here in the chair. An almost empty bottle sits on the table beside him. Annoyed at himself, he gently takes the needle from the vinyl. It's a good way to ruin a needle. And you forgot to eat. Again. His neck is stiff from drunk, motionless sleep. He pushes himself out of the chair, walks to the kitchen sink, gets a glass of water, and chugs it. Christ, it's hot already. Then he walks into the bathroom and pukes. It's become a morning ritual. Comes back into the kitchen, opens the refrigerator, and is relieved that there are still 2 beers in there. He pops one open and guzzles it. Then he goes back in the bathroom and brushes his teeth. There's not enough time to shower, shave, or change clothes, and never mind make coffee or have breakfast, so he tightens his tie and heads out. "You have a night?" Ricci asks when Dietrich comes in. Everyone had a night, Al, Dietrich says, opening his locker. It was night all over the Western Hemisphere. What's wrong with your neck? I slept wrong, Dietrich says. He takes a razor and some shaving cream from the locker and goes into the bathroom. The mirror over the dirty sink is cracked, but the water comes out hot, almost scalding. This broken city, Dietrich thinks, hanging his jacket on the door hook. Dietrich is good at shaving with his shirt and tie on. Practice, practice, practice. And he only gets a few drops of water on his collar. He puts his jacket back on, then goes into the kitchen alcove and takes his mug from a hook on the wall rack. A birthday present from Ricci a few years ago. The mug has that old cartoon of one vulture saying to another, "Patience, my ass, I'm going to kill something." Dietrich fills it with coffee from the Pyrex pot. It's old and bitter, but he doesn't care. So am I, he thinks. He just needs to get the fuzziness out of his head, but it hits his stomach hard. His hand quivers as he carries the mug to his desk. Some coffee sloshes onto the floor. Ricci is in the chair across from him, typing a report on a 19-year-old black gangbanger gunned down in a drive-by in the projects. 34 witnesses and not one of them saw a thing, Ricci says. They don't care, but I should. Garbage taking out garbage. You want me to do a few witnesses? The boss wants you to stay on Bobby, Ricci says. Speaking of garbage on garbage, Dietrich thinks. It's supposed to top 100 today, Ricci says, changing the subject. The fucking AC will go out again. I'm hitting the street anyway, Dietrich says. To do what? Ricci asks. Go through the motions, Dietrich thinks. Dietrich finds Bobby's Aunt Gladys on the stoop in front of her building. Bobby's only known relative. Early 60s, dyed curly red hair, one of those flower print house dresses that looks like she bought it at a drugstore. He knows her from the neighborhood. Right now, he's not sure she's much more sober than he is. I'm sorry for your loss, Dietrich says. Her eyes are red and swollen from crying. Thank you. Did Bobby sleep here night before last? Bobby ain't slept here for weeks, she says. He comes sometimes. I do his laundry. When did you last see him? I don't know, last week sometime, Gladys says. On the street. You stopped going to those meetings? Yeah. Me too, she says. They didn't do me no good. Dietrich has to go through the motions. Do you have any idea if Bobby had any enemies? Her eyes narrow and she glares at him. I'm just doing... You're going to do your job? Gladys asks. Go do your job. I'd like to see that. You already know who did this. Everyone knows who did this. Just like everyone knows you're not going to do a goddamn thing about it. He hands her his card. If you think of anything that might be useful. Yeah, I'll call, she laughs. Right now, I gotta figure out how to pay for a decent funeral. He was 26 years old, a kid. Now I gotta bury him next to his mother. You want to help me with that? The city will do shit, Gladys says. Just like you'll do shit. You have my card. She shoved it into the pocket of her dress. Batshit Bobby was a pain in everyone's ass. Every cop, every shopkeeper, every restaurant and bar owner, every person just walking on the street where Bobby would panhandle and sing his songs. The thing is, pain as he was, people liked him. He was never violent or threatening. He had this goofy smile, and he was funny. His fucking songs were funny, a running comic commentary on the world, the country, the city, and the neighborhood. You couldn't help it. Bobby just made you laugh. He didn't make Big John D'Amico laugh. He made Big John furious. For reasons known only to the vagaries of Bobby's mind, he started singing about Big John's pizza place. Big John sells the pizza pie. Big John sells the pizza pie. Big John sells the pizza pie. It's the only pie that gets you high. This was sometime in the spring, as Dietrich remembers, and crazy dumb Bobby would walk past the pizza place singing this ditty at the top of his lungs. Everyone in the neighborhood who knew anything knew what he was talking about, because Big John D'Amico really ran his pizza joint so he could show the IRS a legitimate source of income, and as a place he and his boys could hang. Big John is a capo in the Tomasino family. His real business is heroin. The pizza is good, though. Dietrich has had it. Big John makes an honest slice. He runs a good place, runs a good neighborhood. Clean, safe, no muggings, no sexual assaults, no drive-bys. The young wise guy wannabes who work there keep an eye on the block, and no street criminal in his right mind is going to pick that street to work. None of the junkies who buy Big John's other product are going to rob an apartment in that neighborhood. No one is going to fence shit in that neighborhood. Problem is, Bobby wasn't in his right mind. One day he walked by singing his Big John Makes the Pizza Pie song, and one of the young wise guy wannabes came out and told him to knock that shit off and show some respect. Bobby asked, "You don't want me singing this song?" "No, we don't want you singing that song." "Then I won't." And that was that, except a couple of days later, Bobby stood out on the sidewalk warbling, "Big John's pizza does no harm, Big John's pizza does no harm, Big John's pizza does no harm, unless you shoot it in your arm." Dietrich and Ricci were in the place that day, having a quick slice for lunch, and they saw the look on Big John's face. It wasn't a happy look. They finished their slices, wiped their mouths, and went outside. "Bobby, what the fuck?" Ricci asked. Dietrich said, "You can't be doing this shit, Bobby." "It's a free country," Bobby said. "It might be a free country," Ricci said, "but it's not a free block. It's John D'Amico's block." "Are you Big John's police?" Bobby asked. "Oh, you don't want to meet his police," Ricci said. "Now move it along." "But move it along," Dietrich said. Bobby walked down the street, singing. Now Dietrich and Ricci drive the neighborhood looking for Louis. The man is just gone. He's not at any of his usual panhandling corners, not in the alleys where he drinks. He sure is shitting out in the vacant lot where Bobby got beaten to death. They ask the other homeless, the other winos, the streetwalkers. If anyone has seen Louis, they're not talking. "You thinking what I am?" Dietrich asks. Bobby and Louis are sleeping in the lot. D'Amico comes and beats Bobby to death. Louis sees it. Now Louis is gone. "We should be looking for Louis in Pelham Bay," Ricci asks. If D'Amico found him already, Dietrich thinks. All funerals are sad. Batshit Bobby's is sad. No mass or nothing, just a quick burial out at Calvary in Woodside with the millions of others. 4 people present: the priest, Aunt Gladys, Dietrich, and Ricci. The 2 cops make it a practice to go to the victims' funerals. It's a matter of respect and to let the families know that they care. Gladys isn't so sure. After the priest mumbles the words after they toss dirt on the coffin, she asks them, "You arrest John D'Amico yet?" She's had a couple already to help her get through this. Dietrich doesn't blame her. "I'm going to interview him," he says. "Phil Donahue can do that," Gladys says. She turns her back and walks away. "No good deed," Ricci says. "She's right," says Dietrich. "Let it go." "I already have." They drive back to the city. Dietrich hits the 2:00 meeting at Holy Name. Sits on the metal folding chair, sips a cup of weak coffee, and listens to How It Works. Rarely have we seen a person fail. He couldn't have been looking too much, Dietrich thinks. He sits through the 12 steps and the people sharing, but passes when it comes to his turn. What's he going to share? The memories, the bad dreams. When the meeting is over, he goes straight to Drury's. Lewis Chambers walks into the house. "A cop named Dietrich's been looking for me." A sergeant takes him up to the detectives. Dietrich takes him to an interview room. "Where have you been?" "Working up my courage," Lewis says. "I know what the right thing to do is. I just needed to get to it." "Tell me about that night." He was asleep. All right, passed out, huddled against the wall of the building. He heard footsteps. You live on the street, you want to keep living. Your ears stay open even when your eyes are closed. He woke up and saw a guy with a tire iron raise it and hit Bobby where he was sleeping. Again and again. He heard Bobby groan and then scream, then cry, then nothing. He stayed in his sleeping bag against the wall, holding still because he was afraid. "I'm ashamed now," Lewis says. "I should have tried to help him." "You'd have just been killed yourself," Dietrich says. "Did you get a look at the guy?" Lewis nods. "Would you recognize him if you saw him again?" "I'll never forget him." "Can you wait for a few minutes?" Dietrich asks. "I'll have someone bring you something. You want coffee or a soda?" "A soda, please." "Sit tight." Dietrich finds a uniform, gives him a couple of bucks, and asks him to bring Lewis a Coke and something from the vending machine. Then he goes and makes a spread of photos, including a mugshot of John D'Amico. He goes back into the room, sits down, and pushes the spread to Lewis. "If you recognize one, point at him." No hesitation, Lewis points out John D'Amico. "Where do you know him from?" Dietrich asks. "Everyone knows Big John," Lewis says. "He runs the neighborhood." "Okay, but I know what you're asking," Lewis says. "That's the man I saw kill Bobby." "How sure are you?" 100%. "Will you write a statement?" Lewis starts to write. His hand shakes badly. Dietrich takes a flask from his jacket and pours some of the contents into the Coke can. "Thank you," Lewis says. He finishes writing. "Come on," Dietrich says. "I'm taking you to Port Authority, putting you on a bus." "Where to?" "Out of town somewhere," Dietrich says. "Somewhere D'Amico can't find you. You have people anywhere?" "I have a cousin in Albany." "Would he take you in?" "Maybe." Dietrich drives Lewis to the bus station, gives him $100 on his card. "Call me every day. I'll tell you when you need to come back to testify. You did a good thing today, Lewis, a brave thing." "Bobby was my friend." "Buy a ticket," Dietrich says. "Don't blow this just on wine." "Maybe when I get to Albany I could quit." "That'd be good," Dietrich says. "I hope so." Lewis gets out of the car. Dietrich goes to the pizza place. One of Big John's mooks comes up to him at the door. "Hot enough for you?" "Is John back?" "He expecting you?" "You his secretary?" Dietrich brushes past him, walks into the back room. Big John is sitting there eating lunch, a big sub stuffed with meats and cheeses. A strand of lettuce clings to his lower lip. He wipes his mouth with a napkin and says, "Sit down. You want something to eat?" Dietrich sits down. "No, thank you." Big John shrugs. "Suit yourself. What brings you here?" "Batshit Bobby." "Oh, yeah, I heard about that," Big John says. "A shame, a young man like that. These drugs, huh?" He shakes his head. "You had a beef with him," Dietrich says. "I ain't exactly alone in that regard," Big John says. "I mean, come on, the kid was a hemorrhoid." "That isn't a capital crime." Big John laughs. "What, you catch this case, Dietrich? Because why? Every sober cop is out chasing the son of Sam." "Something like that." "So you come to me." "Nothing happens in this neighborhood you don't know about," Dietrich says. "So if you know something..." "I don't." "If you heard something..." "I didn't." "If you do..." "You'll be the first to know," Big John says. Takes another big bite of his sandwich. "Anything else?" "You killed this kid, John?" Big John glares at him. "No." "What if I told you I had an eyewitness?" "You don't." Then, because he can't help himself, he adds, "What I hear is you can't find him." "Maybe I heard wrong," Dietrich says. "Get the fuck out of here," Big John says. "No, I mean get the fuck out of my store." Dietrich gets out. Now he knows it. Knows it for dead, solid, certain. Big John D'Amico killed Bobby. When Dietrich gets back to the house, Ricci says, "The lieutenant wants to see you." Dietrich goes into the lieutenant's office. McKay looks up from his paperwork and says, "Guess who I got a call from? John D'Amico." "The fuck you doing, Dietrich?" McKay asks, "going into a man's place of business and accusing him of murder." "I just asked him a question." McKay stares at him for 3 full seconds and then says, "John D'Amico." He doesn't have to say any more. They both know what he means. Once a month, every month, someone from the house picks up a nice envelope from the pizza place. Doubled at Christmas. So Dietrich knows why he was assigned to this case. To not close it. Yeah, well, fuck that. "I have an eyewitness who wrote," Dietrich says. He hands Lewis's statement to McKay. "An ex-con," McKay says. "A wino who saw something in the dark. His credibility is 0. So we've already decided that, Dietrich thinks. And McKay's in the file, and he's been talking to Ricci. "You want me to take this to the ADA?" McKay asks, slapping the statement with the backs of his fingers. "I do." "You're out of your fucking mind," McKay says. "Where's this Chambers now?" "I cut him loose." "You think that was wise?" "I can reach out to him." "I'll bet you can," McKay says. "I need more than a homeless guy's statement. A weapon, prints, a corroborating witness. Work the case, Dietrich. In the meantime, I don't want to get any more phone calls." Back at his desk, Ricci says, "You went to D'Amico. You interviewed Chambers, without me. I didn't want to get you jammed up with the John D'Amico Protection Society. We're partners." "Are we? What's that mean?" "You've been talking to McKay." "He's our boss," Ricci says. "He wanted to see the file." "I'm an asshole," Dietrich says. "I'm sorry." Ricci is quiet for a bit, then he asks, "You're not going to be a swinging dick about this, are you?" Meaning, Dietrich thinks, you're not going to take this case where it leads to John D'Amico. "No, my dick is perfectly stationary." "Because what's the point? You'll never come up with the murder weapon. If you did, there'd be no prints on it. No one is going to credit Lewis Chambers' statement because he's alcoholic and black. Even if they did, D'Amico will have a dozen people to swear to his alibi. Big John beats a kid to death in skates." "Thank God it's Friday, huh?" Ricci asks, relieved. "You got plans for the weekend?" "Just going out to the house in the Hamptons." Ricci laughs, then says, "Maybe you take it a little easy this weekend, huh, Dick?" "Maybe you go fuck yourself, Al," Dietrich says. Then he feels bad about it and says, "Don't worry, I will." He doesn't. Dietrich hits it hard. Goes straight from the house back to Drury's and then drinks his way home. Soaked with booze sweat, when he gets in, he takes a shower and then picks up the bottle. Fuck it, he thinks. Batshit Bobby was a crazy junkie, so who cares? No one. So why should you? And don't be a hypocrite. You took your share of the envelopes. He puts on his music, Beethoven's Sixth, and drinks. He's pretty drunk when Lewis calls. "When do I come back?" Lewis asks. "I want to testify." Maybe if Dietrich hadn't been drunk, he'd have answered differently. But he says, "Forget it. It's not going to happen." "What do you mean?" "I mean, Big John's going to get away with it, and there's nothing you or I can do about it." "I saw him. I'll tell what I saw." "Forget what you saw," Dietrich says. He goes back to drinking. That's Friday night. He doesn't come to until 5 o'clock Sunday morning when the phone rings. Dietrich stands over the body in the alley behind D'Amico's pizza place. Big John lies face down in a smear of dried blood. Someone put 2 in the back of his head. Natural causes, Dietrich thinks. You get 2 bullets in the head, naturally you're going to die. Who found him? The garbage men. Appropriate, Dietrich thinks. The garbage stinks, even in the early morning. The sanitation guys didn't pick it up out of the dumpster when they saw the body. Big John hasn't started to smell yet, so he hasn't been dead very long. 2 9mm shell casings lie in the alley. Dietrich knows that they're not going to find the murder weapon, and it wouldn't matter if they did. There'll be no prints, and the gun will be untraceable. This was a mob hit, Dietrich says. You think? Double tapped, 2 neat shots, Dietrich says. This was a pro. Kind of a coincidence, though, Ricci says. That shit Bobby gets killed, and 2 days later, Big John? It could be related, Dietrich says. D'Amico being a murder suspect might make certain people nervous if they thought he could be looking for a deal. What, Tomasino had him clipped? Dietrich shrugs. It's a theory. More likely someone was getting back for Bobby. Who? Dietrich asks. Bobby had no friends. What about the aunt? Get serious. She might know someone, Ricci says, who'd do the job. We'll bring her in, Dietrich says, but he thinks it's a dead end. Gladys doesn't have the cash or the connections to find a hitter who'd take the job on a Tomasino family captain. What about Louis? Ricci asks. He's out of town. Ricci looks at him funny. How do you know that? I know, Dietrich says. I'm telling you, when we hear who they make capo to replace D'Amico, we'll have our lead suspect. You have a flask in your pocket? Ricci asks. Why? Go take a pop, Ricci says. Your hand is shaking. Dietrich walks to the end of the alley, takes out the flask, and drains a long swallow. The tremors slow down. Like he expected, no one talks to Dietrich. Well, they talk to him, they just don't tell him anything. The regulars at D'Amico's pizza place develop collective amnesia about Saturday night. They don't remember if Big John was there. Some don't even remember if they were there. Dietrich brings in 2 of Big John's soldiers, Vinny DeLuca and Jerry Romano. Neither one of them knows shit. Dietrich goes through the motions anyway. Every Saturday night for the past 10 years, he tells DeLuca, Big John had a card game in the back after the store closed. You telling me this Saturday was any different? Honestly, DeLuca says, I don't remember. Honestly, Dietrich says, you wouldn't know honest if it crawled up your ass. I don't know nothing. Were you at the Saturday night game? Dietrich asked Romano. What Saturday night game? Someone murdered your boss, Dietrich says. You don't care about that? Oh, I care. So help me find out who did it. Like you care? Was it you? Dietrich asks. You saw an opportunity to create a job vacancy? Go fuck yourself. Maybe John was having a beef with one of the other families, Dietrich says. I don't know. That's the way it goes. None of the cooks or the waiters at the pizza place know anything. Big John's family doesn't know anything and politely asks Dietrich to leave them to their grief. Dietrich brings Gladys in. Not because he really thinks that she had anything to do with it, but to go through the motions. Am I under arrest? She asks. He sets a styrofoam cup of coffee in front of her. I just want to have a conversation. You heard about John D'Amico? What do you want me to say? I was sorry to hear? Gladys says. I'm glad he's dead. May he burn in hell. Do you know anything about it? Dietrich asks. Gladys looks up at the video camera. Just what they're saying on the street. What are they saying? That a black guy did it. That's always the story, Dietrich says. Where were you around 2:30 this morning? At home in bed. Alone? Dietrich asks. The hell you think? I have to ask, Dietrich says, if you have an alibi. You done? Can I go? For now. She stands up. Whoever did this, God bless him. Dietrich steps out of Drury's into the soggy afternoon. A black Lincoln is waiting for him. The driver leaning against the fender says, Dietrich, Mr. Tomasino would like a word with you. Dietrich gets in. They drive down to Mulberry Street. Little coffee and pastry joint. The driver walks Dietrich to a table where Vito Tomasino sits sipping an espresso. Dietrich sits down. Tomasino gets right to it. Someone killed one of my captains. Give me his name and I'll arrest him. Is that what you think? Tomasino asks. I think Big John was looking at a murder beef, Dietrich says, and someone was afraid that he'd start telling stories and naming names. You talking about me? I'm guessing it was more of a committee decision, Dietrich says. Believe me, no one was worried about the murder thing, Tomasino says. We knew that case was going nowhere. Why am I here? I want to tell you two things, Tomasino says. One, let certain people know that there'll be a brief interruption of the envelopes, but as soon as I sort a few things out, it will pick back up again. Business as usual, Dietrich thinks. Two, Tomasino says, my people tell me some wino named Louis Chambers was going around the neighborhood Saturday night, saying he was going to kill John. Dietrich doesn't react. If you find this Chambers before we do, Tomasino says, you don't take him to the house. You let us know where he is. We'll do the rest. John and I came up together. You really gonna lay this off that some old drunk did Big John D'Amico? Dietrich asks. I'm telling you for the last time, Tomasino says. It wasn't anyone in my family. That leaves 4 other families. Find this Chambers. You know your good friend John beat a kid to death, Dietrich says. I could give a fuck who killed him, but I'll do my job. You don't tell me how to do it. Gino will give you a ride back, Tomasino says. See if the bar at Drury's collapsed without you. It didn't. Dietrich keeps it to 2 pops, goes back to the house. Ricci has a hooker in the interview room. Tell Detective Dietrich what you told me. She basically repeats what Tomasino told him. Saturday night, Louis, drunk, was storming around the neighborhood saying that he was going to kill Big John for what he did to batshit Bobby. So Louis didn't get on the bus, Dietrich thinks. He stayed in town. And when I fucked up and told him we weren't going to prosecute D'Amico, he decided to do it himself. God damn it. And what else? Dietrich prompts her. Louis had a gun, she says. So Chambers our guy, McKay says. I'm not there yet, Dietrich says. He did it before, McKay says, and he told people he was going to do it. Yeah, Dietrich says. And he'd be the first wino ever to walk around the streets yelling about killing someone. I could go out and find 3 right now. Here's what you have to believe if you believe Louis did this. You have to believe a 52-year-old drunk crept up behind Big John D'Amico and put 2 in him at close range. Chambers thinks D'Amico killed his best friend, McKay says. We have Chambers in town saying he was going to kill D'Amico. Witnesses put him with a gun. Motive, means, opportunity. Why are you defending this guy, Dietrich? Maybe because the man had the stones to step up on his friend's murder, Dietrich says. Against a mob captain. Apparently he had the stones to kill him too, McKay says. Pick him up. Back at the desk, Dietrich says, Tomasino wants us to gift wrap Louis for him. I ain't giving him up to be tortured, Ricci says. So what, Port Authority? I figure you already tried that. I did, Dietrich says. He came back. To kill D'Amico. If he did, Dietrich says, we should pin a medal on him. But you're still not buying him for this, are you? Ricci asks. No, I'm not, Dietrich thinks. Something in the man's eyes. He'd shot someone before and did 18 years for it. Only the hardcore killers do it twice, and Dietrich doesn't get that from Louis. But he says, how often have you heard of a civilian killing a wise guy? Almost never. Not almost never, Dietrich says. Never. Because it's never happened. Whoever did this had to know about D'Amico's routine. He had to know about the weekly card game. Everyone on the West Side knew about it, Ricci says. Shit, we knew about it. They go looking for Lewis. They don't find him. Dietrich gets up in the morning, guzzles water out of the tap, then goes into the bathroom and throws up. Comes back out, takes 3 aspirin, washes them down with a beer, and goes into work. Doesn't remember getting home last night. Only remembers looking for Lewis, knocking off, telling himself he wasn't going to Drury's, then going there. You're a fucking blackout drunk, he tells himself. That's what it's come to. Ricci looks at him with a combination of concern, pity, and anger. What? Dietrich asks. Why don't you get out of here, Ricci says. Before the boss sees you. I'll say you're out looking for Chambers. Fuck that. No, fuck you, Ricci says. I'm about done with this shit. Dietrich shrugs, gets up, goes out on the street. Lewis isn't at any of the 3 bars he hits. The desk sergeant calls up and says there's a mook in holding on a drug charge who wants to talk about the D'Amico shooting. Ricci has him brought upstairs. Jimmy Carson is your classic dirtbag, picked up for selling a bag of weed to a plainclothes from anti-crime. What you got for us? Ricci asks. Can you help me on the dope charge? Depends on what you got. I was outside the alley that morning. What alley? Ricci asks. What morning? The pizza place alley, Carson says. Saturday morning. I guess it was Sunday morning. And? I heard shots, Carson says. I didn't think much of them because, it's the neighborhood. But then I saw a guy come out. He was tucking something into his pants, like a gun. Did he see you? Ricci asks. I don't think so, Carson says. I flattened myself against a building like one of those squirrels, No, I don't know, Ricci says. What squirrels? Flying squirrels. Ricci asks, what did this guy look like? White guy, Carson says. Medium height, I don't know. You sure it was a white guy? Ricci says. Pretty sure. Sit tight. Ricci walks out of the room. Lewis is never going to be mistaken as white, he thinks. He puts together a spread. Lewis, another black guy, DeLuca, and Romano. Goes back in and shows it to the mook. You recognize one of these? Ricci asks. Carson takes a long look, then, no. You sure? None of these are the guy I saw. Okay, Ricci says. We might want to contact you again. Can you help me out with this thing? Yeah, Ricci says. We'll take care of it. Do me a favor, though. Next bag of weed you sell, do it downtown somewhere. Absolutely. How many shots did you hear? Ricci asks. 2. Bam, bam. And what time was this? 2:30, 3 o'clock. Then he adds, there was something else, something weird. The guy was singing. Singing? Ricci asks. What was he singing? Some song about pizza. Ricci gives Carson his card. You think of anything else, give me a ring. You got it, Carson says. Do we believe this guy? Ricci wonders. Did he just make up a story to bail his ass out? He had the number of shots right, the right time. But he could have heard neighborhood talk. But Ricci doubts it. The mook had the ring of truth about him. He saw a white guy coming out of the alley, singing one of Batshit Bobby's songs. Dietrich goes down to see Tomasino. You got news for me? Tomasino asks when Dietrich walks in. Dietrich tells him about the witness who saw a white guy come out of the alley and his failure to ID Lewis. Tomasino listens, then says, I'm not calling off nothing. At least wait until you know you have the right guy. Here's the way I look at it, Tomasino says. Killing this Chambers if he didn't do it is better than not killing him if he did. What's one more wino, give or take? If Chambers shows up dead, I'm coming for you. Ooh, Tomasino mimics, shaking. Maybe Tomasino believes it, Dietrich thinks. Maybe he's just using Lewis to cover up his own hit on D'Amico. Doesn't matter. Dietrich leaves, knowing that the only way to save Lewis Chambers' life is to jail him for a murder he didn't commit. He might be better off in prison, Dietrich tells himself. He'll have food, shelter. It's better than freezing to death on the street. Keep telling yourself that, Dietrich thinks. But you have enough for a murder warrant. You have him saying he was going to kill D'Amico. You have him in the neighborhood at the time of the killing. You have witnesses saying he had a gun. Yeah, but a 9? Dietrich goes back to his apartment, opens the bottom drawer of the bureau in his bedroom. Under some T-shirts, he finds it, a throwdown weapon. He and Ricci took it off a dealer a couple of years ago, and Dietrich took it home for safekeeping and stuck it in the drawer. He takes it out now and thinks about shooting 2 rounds into his pillow, but opening it up, he sees there are 2 rounds already out of the clip. Handy, he thinks. A lot of cops have a spare weapon they can lay down at a scene, whether it's to plead self-defense or set up a suspect they know is guilty. Or, in this case, Dietrich thinks, one that isn't. If he can find Lewis, if he doesn't have a 9mm automatic, Dietrich's going to lay one on him. It won't be an exact match, Dietrich thinks. But it doesn't have to be. D'Amico was shot with a 9. If Lewis has a 9 on him, forensics can't rule the gun out. It's more than enough to charge Lewis, probably even enough to convict him. What probably happens is that Lewis's PD takes a look at the evidence and tells his client to plead guilty to avoid the death penalty. It stinks, Dietrich thinks, but a lot of life stinks. He intends to stay sober that night, but the road to hell, right? The alarm wakes him. He does what has become his ritual water guzzling and vomiting, sees blood in the bowl now. Then he sticks the 9 in the waistband of his slacks and goes looking for Lewis. He finds him about 6 in the morning, sleeping under an overpass on 97th. Lewis is out cold under some blankets next to a shopping cart. Dietrich leans down and gently removes the pistol that Lewis clutches in his right hand. A .38 revolver, an old piece of shit. Clearly not the murder weapon. Dietrich takes out the 9 and presses it into Lewis's hand, making sure the index finger makes contact with the trigger. Then he pulls his legit service weapon and kicks the throwdown gun from Lewis's hand. Police, put your hands over your head. Lewis is groggy as hell. It's nothing to roll him over and cuff his hands behind his back. Picking him up is a little tougher, but Dietrich calls for an assist. A black and white comes, and they put Lewis in the back. Ricci isn't all that happy about it. You found Lewis without me, he says to Dietrich. You have other cases, Dietrich says, and I couldn't sleep anyway. And he still had a gun on him? Ricci asks, looking Dietrich square in the eyes. Dietrich doesn't blink. A 9 in his hand. Ricci shakes his head. It's unusual as hell. Usually the weapon goes in a dumpster, down a drain, into the Hudson. The shooter doesn't keep it, but Lewis is a homeless drunk, so who knows? Still. What about the white guy Carson saw leaving the alley? Ricci asks. He was mistaken, Dietrich says. Or he was lying to make a deal. Ricci lowers his voice. You jamming, Chambers? To keep him out of Tomasino's hands? Dietrich doesn't answer. Doesn't really need to. Let's go talk to him, Ricci says. In the interview room, Dietrich brings Lewis a cup of coffee and asks, Do you know why you're here, Lewis? Lewis's hands shakes like he's trying to mix paint. I didn't kill that man. You told people you were going to, Ricci says. I was running my mouth, Lewis says. I was angry. And that's the story we want the jury to hear, Dietrich says. You were angry. You were out of your mind. You saw D'Amico and you just lost it. Maybe we can get it down to murder too, maybe even manslaughter. I didn't kill the man. We found you with the murder weapon, Ricci says. Lewis stares at them. He's been around enough to know exactly what happened. He looks directly at Dietrich. You do me like that? I want you to write, Dietrich says, feeling like shit. I want you to write that you walked by that alley You saw John D'Amico and you shot him. He pushes a pad and pen toward Lewis. Lewis pushes it back. I want a lawyer. He's going to tell you the same thing, Ricci says. He's going to take one look at the evidence and tell you to plead guilty. Then I'll let him tell me that. Okay, Ricci shrugs. It'll take him a while to get here. You want something? Dietrich asks. Some cookies or something? I'm not hungry. They go out of the room. McKay calls them into his office. Suarez, an ADA, is sitting there. Did he give it up? McKay asks. He wants a lawyer. Fine, Suarez says. It's all the same. He was dumb enough to keep the murder weapon. You said there were 2 rounds missing from the clip? Ricci nods. But what about the witness who didn't pick him out? Suarez asks. Said it was a white guy. I'll have to give that to the PD. He was probably afraid to pick anyone out, Ricci says. We'll take another run at him. You have enough to charge? McKay asks. We'll charge him with a felony in possession of a firearm, Suarez says. That's enough to hold him and see if we clear up this witness shit and what forensics has to say. They go back into the interview room. Your lawyer's on his way. Am I under arrest? On the gun charge, Dietrich says. I had a gun, Lewis says. He nods sadly. Now even he's beginning to think he did it. Ricci brings Carson back in. I'd like you to take another look at these photos, Ricci says. You know, it was dark, it was late. He slides the spread over, but keeps his index finger on Lewis Chambers' photo. Carson gets it. Second thought, he says. Yeah, you know, I recognize a guy. Which one? Carson points at Lewis's picture. Him. You sure? Positive, Carson says. Last time you said he was white, Ricci says. About medium height. This is a 6'3" black man. They make eye contact. Carson knows his part. I was afraid, he says. I mean, wouldn't you be? But you're not afraid now. You have him in custody, right? Carson says. Otherwise you wouldn't have brought me in. You willing to look at a lineup? They set it up. Line up Lewis, 2 other black guys, and 2 white guys. One of them is Dietrich, because he's medium height. He's there, and Suarez wants to spit Carson's original account out for good. They open the window. Do you recognize anyone? Ricci asks. Carson looks at the lineup. Then he whispers to Ricci. What do you want me to do? What do you mean? Carson looks scared. What do you want me to do? If you recognize someone, Ricci says, I want you to pick him out. Just to be sure, he lays 4 fingers along the crease of his slacks below camera range. Number 4, Carson says. Lewis Chambers. Where do you know him from? Ricci asks. I saw him coming up that alley last Sunday morning. Ricci looks at Suarez. Okay, Suarez says. The public defender, Lowenstein, looks across the table at Suarez. Your witness changed his mind, she says. Literally, from white to black. Suarez shrugs. What do you want me to tell you, Wendy? How about the truth? He picked Chambers out of a lineup. With no help from you, I suppose. Suarez holds his hands up. Lowenstein shakes her head. We have your client with a murder weapon in his hand, Suarez says. We'll see what forensics says. They're going to say D'Amico was double-tapped with a 9, Suarez says. Plead him. What will you offer? Murder 2. 15 to life, Lowenstein says. I'd agree to the lower end. Chambers still probably dies in prison. He dies on the street first, Suarez says. Either Thomasina or the bottle. I'll take it to my client, Lowenstein says. Sell it to your client, Suarez says. You don't want to try this case, Wendy. You can't win. Lowenstein shoves papers into a briefcase. What are they going to do about Dietrich? What do you mean? Come on, Hector, that man is a blackout drunk. He was a great cop once. Yeah, and I was a virgin once. Holy name. Metal folding chair. Dietrich says, I'm Richard. I'm an alcoholic. Hello, Richard. I've been sober about 4 hours now, Dietrich says. I guess that's all. That's it. You're in the right place, Richard. At the break, he sees Gladys out on the street having a smoke. You came back, she says. You too. Yeah, after Bobby, she says. You know. I know. She looks into his eyes. What she did, I'm grateful. I tried, Dietrich says. I didn't get it done. Gladys looks at him funny. This little smirk comes across her lips. Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. Whatever you say, Dietrich, Gladys says. I get it. He doesn't go back to the meeting. He goes to Drury's. Hands shaking, head reeling. What does Gladys get? He has this little flash, this thought. He drinks it away. Goes home and puts on Mahler. Kinder Totenlieder. Songs for dead children. Remembers those days. What were they, 10, 15 years now? That year he solved 3 murdered child cases in a row. A baby drowned in a bathtub. The infant shaken to death. The little girl that... He can't finish the thought. Just like he can't shake the memory. The images. They say that water is the most powerful erosive force in the world. It wears away rock, cuts canyons. But sorrow, too, erodes. You see so much sadness on this job. It wears you down, year after year, murder after murder, heartbreak after heartbreak. It washes away joy, carries it downstream like silt. But slowly, you don't see it happening, don't really feel it. And then one day you wake up and you realize you no longer have the capacity for happiness. Dietrich is well read. He knows his Yeats. Too long a sacrifice can make a stone of the heart. Maybe, Dietrich thinks. But he only wishes his heart was a stone, only wishes he couldn't feel anymore. The sorrow you can never drink away, never drown. He tries, though. Gives it his best shot. Dietrich gets the call in the morning from the forensics guys. The gun is a match, they tell him. We'll send up the report, but I thought you'd want to know right away. So the gun is consistent? Dietrich asks. It's not consistent, the guy says. It's an exact match. Dietrich tries to keep his voice even. What? It's an exact match, the guy says. 100%. That's the murder weapon. Dietrich sets down the phone. Dietrich interrogates himself. Where were you around 2:30 Sunday morning? At home, asleep? Okay, passed out. Were you alone? Yes. Can anyone verify you were there? No. So you don't have an alibi? No. You took a throwdown gun from your apartment, didn't you? Yes. You planted it on Lewis Chambers? Yes. It's an exact match to the weapon that murdered John D'Amico, isn't it? Yes. Did anyone other than you have access to that weapon? No. Do you remember anything about Saturday night, Sunday morning? No. You were in a blackout, weren't you? Yes. You could have murdered D'Amico. That's possible, isn't it? It's possible. That's what happened, isn't it? I don't know. You killed him. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. Dietrich walks out of the house. Sometimes you drink and you can't get drunk. What's happening to Dietrich now? He sits at Drury's, knocks back 1, 2, 3, but they don't hit him. They won't do their work. He gets up and walks onto the street. Gladys answers the doorbell. "I need to talk to you," Dietrich says. She lets him in. He follows her into the little kitchen. An open can of beer sits on the table. "You want?" she asks. "No," Dietrich says. "When I saw you at Holy Name, you said you were grateful for what I did. I am. What did I do?" She looks at him for a long time, then asks, "Don't you know?" "I don't remember." Gladys nods. She gets it. "Are you sure you want to know?" "No," Dietrich says, "but I have to." "You killed him," Gladys says. Dietrich feels dizzy. The world goes black in front of him like he's dying. "How do you know this?" "You told me," Gladys says. "Don't you remember?" she asks. "You came here 3 a.m, woke me up, told me you did your job, that there was justice for Bobby after all. I said, God bless you. But when I brought you in the house, I figured you were just doing the job," Gladys says. "Covering your ass. I got it." Dietrich's chin drops to his chest. He puts his face in his hands. "Don't worry," Gladys says. "It goes to the grave with me. Like I said, I'm grateful. Like I said, God bless you. And he will for what you did. He will. I pray for you every day. I light candles for you and Bobby." Dietrich walks the street. It can end here, he thinks. It can end with Louis. He pleads out. Case closed. He's better off in prison. He'll live longer. Forget about it, he tells himself. D'Amico was a piece of shit. He belongs in hell for what he did to Bobby. Then, you killed a man. You're a murder cop and you killed a man. In cold blood. You hunted him, you waited in ambush, you stepped up behind him, and you took his life. He steps into an alley, leans against the wall, and throws up. "Let's take a walk," Ricci says when Dietrich comes in. They go out to the street. "I just heard," Ricci says. "Louis is going to plead. The forensic report sealed the deal." Dietrich nods. "Carson," Ricci says. "He got all hinky when he saw you in the lineup." "Yeah." "And that 9, Ricci says. It looks a lot like the one we took off that smack dealer in Amsterdam a couple years ago. You remember that?" "Vaguely." "We were going to save it for a rainy day," Ricci says. "We just have a rainy day, Diet?" Dietrich doesn't answer. Ricci takes this in. Then he says, "These 9s, they all pretty much look alike. Al, let it go," Ricci says. "It's done. It's over." When they get back to the house, it's noisy. A celebration going on. "What's up?" Ricci asks. "Didn't you hear?" the desk sergeant says. "They got the son of Sam up in Yonkers. You believe that? Yonkers." Dietrich sits in his chair at home. Squat glass of Jameson's on the table by his left hand. Air conditioning protesting loudly at the struggle against the heat. Mahler on the stereo. Mahler's Second Symphony. The Resurrection. Dietrich writes on the yellow legal pad. A statement. A full confession of how he murdered Big John D'Amico. An exoneration of Louis Chambers. The whiskey is good, smoky. The music beautiful. The man watched his daughter die, Dietrich thinks. She was 4 years old, and he still wrote such beautiful music. Dietrich finishes writing, dates and signs the paper, then lays it down on his lap. Picks up his service weapon, takes the last swallow of whiskey, feels its burn go all the way down. Then he sticks the barrel in his mouth and pulls the trigger. The charges against Louis Chambers were dismissed. he went back to living on the streets. Detective Richard Dietrich was buried without ceremony at Calvary Cemetery. There were no bagpipes, no honor guard, no rifle salute. Present were a minister, Al Ricci, and Gladys Mullen. The murder of Batshit Bobby was never closed.